Did you know that there is a new type of aiming in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone 2? And if you read around on the internet, some people are saying that this is going to be the future of aiming, and that this technology, when fully adopted, is going to make controller players more accurate and more competitive. Now, the more eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that when Warzone 2 was released, a new setting was added to the advanced controller settings in Warzone 2 and Modern Warfare 2. And that is gyroscopic aiming. A technology which has existed for a while and is utilized on a number of different platforms, except for Xbox, that slowly and steadily is starting to be adopted as a form of aiming. Now, there are 101 different questions about this. What the hell is gyroscopic aiming? How is it utilized? Does it give you a competitive advantage? And is it the future of aiming like some people proclaim? And do you all now suddenly have the headache of having to learn something new and different because you don't want to be left behind when the competition starts heating up? These are all really important questions, especially if there's a competitive advantage at hand here that could potentially completely change the way we play Warzone 2 and Modern Warfare 2. So I set out to answer those questions through all sorts of fiddling, testing, and everything in between. Now, I am a keyboard and mouse player across pretty much everything that isn't Warzone 2. I play Squad, Rainbow Six Siege, Valorant, CSGO, and everything on a keyboard and mouse, specifically the Logitech G915 and the Logitech G Pro Superlight X. And for those of you who know me from Call of Duty Warzone, I am a top 1% player for controller players, at least in Warzone 1 in terms of KD, accuracy, and other statistics. And I'm also a controller nerd. I have very specific settings, very specific response curves, sensitivities, dead zones, and all of these controller connoisseur settings, if you will, to try and make me the most accurate player in-game. So I figured, who better qualified to answer this question than somebody with keyboard and mouse experience, controller experience, and now gyroscope experience. Now, all of this testing required a lot of time and effort, and my internet provider also had a meltdown somewhere during this process, so if you see some stuttering in the gameplay, don't worry, it isn't your system. But this was a lot of work, because learning gyroscopic aiming was effectively like learning a third language. So if you could subscribe to the channel and help us get closer to 100k, and drop a little like, it really would mean a lot. So to start with, what the hell is gyro aiming, and why do some people think it is the future of aiming with a controller? Now, gyroscopic aiming is quite literally what it says on the tin. It's utilizing the combination of a gyroscope and accelerometer to map the individual movements of your controller to the movement you see on screen. The PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4 all feature a gyroscope controller, and you can utilize this to wiggle around your controller and produce movement whilst you're playing. And this was very carefully used in things like Astro's Playroom when the PS5 released, but can actually be utilized as an aiming method and is something that already exists in Fortnite. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is me flicking around my PlayStation 5 controller with a software in the background known as Aimlab. And you can see that there is a one-to-one movement between me flicking my controller and my crosshair on screen pointing to the location that I flicked my controller. And if you're getting some sort of weird Nintendo flashbacks, that's because Nintendo are the largest advocate of this technology. They utilize it on their Nintendo Switch, and even as far back as the original Nintendo Wii, gyroscopes have been employed in some way, shape, or form to make aiming on Nintendo an actual thing. And in the background, you can also see some examples of me just fiddling around with it in a private lobby of Modern Warfare 2. So why do some people think that this is the future of aiming? Well, it comes down to the inherent design of an analog stick versus a gyroscope. An analog stick is an analog device which is not laser precise and it's not pinpoint accurate. There are dead zones on the interior of an analog stick where your controller doesn't register input. There are also dead zones on the exterior of an analog stick, and there are even other things like axial dead zones, and just generally how the acceleration of the stick is mapped is not a one-to-one reality with your actual thumb movement. For comparison's sake, when you use a mouse, the laser or optical sensor that mouse is using is effectively pinpoint accurate. It is a 100% accurate method of moving a cursor on screen because it effectively reflects the amount of movement. Now, yes, you can change the sensitivities across a controller and a mouse, but the principle is the same. A mouse has a 0 to 100 value in terms of movement, and a controller has kind of like a sort of 10 to 20% to 90 to 95% to sometimes 100% movement value. But the whole point is that a controller fundamentally by design is not pinpoint precise. A gyroscope, on the other hand, is by design effectively 100% precise because a gyroscope has minimum and maximum values, and it's all dependent on the actual movement input of your device in order for it to calculate what that input value is. There are no dead zones, no grey areas, no axial dead zones, no response curves, nothing that it has to add in terms of information to estimate where the movement should take place. It's simply just a one-to-one mapping to some extent, plus or minus sensitivity. So the hypothetical idea here is that because a gyroscope has that degree of accuracy that's otherwise lacking in traditional analog sticks, then theoretically you should be better with gyroscopic aiming than you are with analog aiming. And again, as another side note which I've already mentioned, Xbox controllers do not have gyroscopes, so that's not something that you can do on Xbox. So to some extent, there's a lot to answer in terms of if this is a competitive advantage, because quite literally one whole console platform does not have access to this feature. So is this any good, and will it give you an advantage in Warzone 2 and Modern Warfare 2? Well, the answer isn't really simple. I wanted to just say definitively no or yes, but it was actually more challenging to do that than to effectively explain this grey area. Now, the current implementation isn't the best in Modern Warfare 2. It feels like there's some calibration that needs to be done. In comparison, Aimlab felt really snappy and responsive, whereas Modern Warfare 2 felt like it was kind of getting the answer 98% right, and then in other ways it wasn't quite understanding what to do. But in terms of what this tool offers, it's almost like adding a Z-axis. Now, when you use a controller, it's an X and a Y axis. You go left or right or up and down. And adding the gyroscopic element theoretically is still an X and Y axis input, but it felt really strange. It was like learning a second or third language, and it was like having everything you knew about aiming be thrown out the window, and here are some radical new ideas. It's really confusing, and it's like somebody is pointing a Nintendo Wii remote at your screen whilst you're trying to play, and like messing around with it almost. But that didn't really deter me. I was 100% focused on finding out what all this rage was about, and why so many people online claim that this is a futuristic thing, or is going to be the future. And honestly, I really struggled to understand it. Now, fundamentally, yes, this does technically to some extent make you snappier and quicker at aiming than a regular analog input, but that's just presuming that your analog input is just a dud input, you haven't done any messing with it, you haven't changed response curves, you haven't changed dead zones, and I have. And assuming you followed my controller settings videos, there's a good chance that you have as well. So the gulf in terms of the aiming accuracy didn't feel as large as I was anticipating. So I then decided to tweak with more settings to see what this could generally offer in terms of better control, recoil compensation, so on and so forth. And the conclusion fundamentally was to use it as a recoil canceller. And what this means is that I wasn't utilizing any horizontal input from the gyroscope, only vertical to tilt the controller up and down, and I was only utilizing it when I was already aimed down sight. And what this meant is that I could slowly tilt my controller forwards in order to cancel out the recoil of any given weapon that I was firing. So it basically meant that I had a way of cancelling recoil without having to make precise adjustments on my right analog stick. And on my right analog stick, I could just focus at looking at the target and use the extra gyroscopic aim as a method of cancelling recoil and generally being more accurate. And after a while, it did kind of feel natural. It started to make a bit more sense in my head, and, you know, maybe some of the neurons that were firing started to make a bit more sense, and some brain cells were starting to link up, and this kind of new muscle memory began to form. And it did make sense, and it felt like, tilting that controller down was a natural reaction in the same way that slightly pulling back on your analog stick or mouse feels like a natural reaction for recoil compensation. But as with all things, there are caveats. And the caveat to this is that Call of Duty seemingly heavily nerfs the aim assist that you receive, or just flat out deletes it entirely. If you utilize gyroscopic aiming, it appears as though the aim assist values just get completely destroyed. So all of that initial accuracy and muscle memory that you possess from aiming in Call of Duty is naturally assisted by aim assist, and once that's gone, you kind of have to work with this new realm of, right, I've got to rely on my analog stick and tilting the controller, and then eventually maybe I'll reach a similar level to what I was doing before. And suddenly all of the articles and all the videos I was reading online started to make a little more sense, because they were talking about single player titles, or they were talking about something like CSGO where a single shot to the head is a guaranteed kill, but they weren't talking about the intermediary shooters where recoil compensation is something that's necessary, maintaining target accuracy is necessary, or something like Apex Legends where people have a vast amount of health and you have to constantly track them for an extended period of time. They were effectively talking more about micro-precision adjustments and flick shooting, which is fine if you're playing a Quake or CSGO game from 20 years ago that most people on console aren't really touching anymore, but in terms of regular controller players, it just didn't seem to work. Now, it's worth pointing out at this point that your mileage may vary. If you try gyroscopic aiming and you find that after a few days, or dare I say a few weeks, you're a substantially better aimer, then that's really good for you. But as somebody who's fine-tuned my control levels to the extent where I feel so comfortable and accurate already, it honestly just felt like more of a harm than a help, and it honestly felt like I was ripping away muscle memory for something that, in the grand scheme of things, won't make a massive difference. If you're somebody who's playing on highly tuned controller settings with aim assist, you'll achieve the same levels of accuracy as somebody who has decided to go for gyroscopic aiming, in my personal opinion. Whether it's the plating system, the harsh headshot multiplier, the slightly extended time to kill, or the fact that weapons generally in this game come with some degree of both vertical and horizontal recoil, it just didn't seem to make this massive, shocking difference that I was reading online. Nor did it feel as natural or as comfortable as just using two analog sticks with some precision adjustments. It honestly felt like I was adding effectively a third element to my playstyle that was overcomplicating things. It kind of felt like a bit like the first time you pick up a racing wheel or a flight stick, and if you've ever done those before for PC, it's like learning, again, a second or third language. It's really confusing. I have a Thrustmaster Warthog A10 HOTAS at the bottom of my desk, and when I first powered that thing on, it was like being intimidated like I've never been intimidated before. Now, a gyroscopic aiming sensor isn't quite the same level, but it's definitely quite daunting. And whilst the benefits of something like a racing wheel or a flight stick for a racing title or a flight game seem quite inherently obvious, the benefits of adding gyroscopic aiming don't seem to be quite as night and day as I would picture. So is gyroscopic aiming the future of aiming on controller? In my opinion, probably not. I think slightly more advanced sensors in terms of how analog sticks work, as well as the introduction of more reliable sensors like Hall effect sensors, will likely be the future of controller aiming, and gyroscopic aiming will still exist or likely have wider adoption for people who are interested in that avenue. Now, I highly recommend jumping into a private match of Modern Warfare 2 or Warzone 2 and just messing around with gyro aiming and seeing for yourself, whether you're on PC or PlayStation, if this is something that gels well for you. Because honestly, it kind of feels more like if it's the shoe that fits, as opposed to something that is objectively a yes or no answer. In my opinion, we're slightly teetering towards the more subjective area of, no, I don't think this is a great fit if you already have a highly tuned controller setup, whereas for some people, it might honestly completely blow your mind and change the way that you approach Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone 2. So folks, that's today's video on gyro aiming, and another question slash tips slash helpful guide of what the hell is going on in 2022 with Call of Duty. And if you found it helpful, please consider subscribing. We're really close to reaching 100k and it would really mean a lot. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again in the next one.